Hello and welcome back to the Stubborn Book Podcast. This is episode 4. Today is chapter 2, and this chapter revolves around another farm family story like the last one, but this one is a little bit darker. It's a pretty tough one, and I will give you a trigger warning before we begin. There is an attempted suicide, and then there are some very cruel narcissistic behavior. We will delve into narcissism in this chapter and how an average farmer's esteem needs or an average business person's esteem needs can push him or her into a very dark place that pushes everyone away. And then what measures that everyone should have in every family business or partnership to put in place and prevent or overcome this worst form of stubbornness, narcissism. So let's have a listen. Chapter 2. Heart. Start caring about others' needs and feelings, not just yours.
Abraham Maslow was a famous psychologist back in the 1940s who talked about people's needs. He made a pyramid showing the 5 basic needs at the bottom and the need to be the best version of oneself at the top. Each level represents a kind of need people have. Starting at the bottom, here are the 5 levels on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. 1. Basic needs. In a family business, this means making sure it makes enough money to cover rent, bills, and food. 2. Safety needs. Once our basics are covered, we want to feel safe and secure. In a family business, this could be like having savings for a rainy day or insurance in case something goes wrong. 3. Social needs. We all want to feel loved and like we belong somewhere, right? In a family business, this is about everyone getting along, supporting each other, and feeling like they're part of the team. 4. Esteem needs. This is about feeling good about ourselves and being proud of our work. In a family business, it means being recognized for our hard work and feeling valued. And 5. Self-actualization. This is the top of the pyramid. It's all about becoming the best version of ourselves. In a family business, it's when the family is not just working for money, but they're passionate and really love what they do. Whereas 56% of Americans in 2023 can't pay a $1,000 emergency, most established family-owned businesses perceive themselves at being at the top level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is the self-actualized level. In fact, most are stuck one notch down at the esteem level. In my opinion, this is a very dangerous place to put yourself because too often we make decisions at this level based on pride and self-esteem rather than rational behavior. I saw the negative impact from this emotional state in living color when my dad plowed my own crops under out of jealousy. At the esteem step, people want to feel good about themselves and be liked by others, but this can lead them to do things they later regret, especially in a family business. It's tough watching smart folks have these people-pleasing traits. Let me list them off right now. 1. They have an incessant need for being liked. They make choices just because others think they are good. 2. They are scared of being turned down. They avoid things because they're scared of rejection or being laughed at. 3. They are constantly playing the comparison game. They keep looking at what others have, and they feel bad about themselves. 4. They want instant gratification. They choose what feels good now but isn't great for them in the long term. As farmers or self-made businessman or woman, we are proud about how humble we are. And yet too often it is our pride that is our Achilles' heel and causes empires to fall. I could give you over 100 examples of situations where level-headed farmers did irrational things out of pride and brought their farming empires crashing down. One example that sticks out to me is my buddy Matt's family.
From wonderful to that which has to go.
I dated a nice girl named Sadie while in college. I thought things were going well until she stopped returning my calls to go out on our next date. I saw her at the pub one night and asked her what happened. She was honest. She said I was a nice boy, but my dad didn't milk enough cows for the lifestyle she wanted. She dreamed of being a dairy farmer's wife, not a hillbilly's wife. And that was that. Later that spring, she hooked up with a buddy of mine. Matt came from one of the largest farms in Western Ontario. Although I was jealous and resented it at first, I got over it fast because they did make a good couple, and my buddy deserved to be married to a good girl. Matt was a really good guy who could talk your ear off about tractors, but didn't know what to say around girls. And it was really awesome to see Sadie bring out such a big smile on his face. A few years later, they had what I thought was the perfect wedding. They had cut a maze into a cornfield and had a big white wedding tent with 300 guests in the middle of it, with tiki torches bordering the cornfield. The farm sat hundreds of miles from any city, and it was a perfect warm summer night where you could reach out and touch the stars. I remember Matt's dad, Norm, getting up after the dinner, and in his speech he said, "Matt, we wondered for a very long time if you were going to be a bachelor for life. We couldn't get you to go out with any girls on a date. We thought you just might be a hopeless cause. But then you came home with Sadie, and I'm simply amazed. You found the perfect girl. She's not only a hard worker, but she is a lot of fun to be around and can make a hell of a good pie." Norm joked, smacking his lips. He went on to say how much his mom and him loved their son, but statistically divorce is 50-50, and if that would ever happen, "Sorry, son, we love her way more than you. If you get divorced, she stays and you go." Everyone laughed hysterically, and I remember telling the story to a friend after because I was so impressed by it. Sadie became part of Matt and Norm's operation the day they tied the knot. And the joke that went around the community had been that she was so good with the cows that they had to buy a bigger milk tank because she had been able to improve milk production that much. About 5 years later, I got a call from Matt and his voice was quivering over the phone. He was at the hospital and didn't know what to do. Apparently, the trouble had started earlier that week when a feed salesman came to speak to Norm about the animals with a PhD nutritionist that came from the feed company's head office. Sadie had just finished her chores and joined in the conversation. Because she had a master's degree in dairy nutrition, she posed some good questions to the nutritionist and got right up into his face. She wanted to know why the cows weren't milking as she thought they should. While Norm was happy with their production levels, she thought they could push out an extra 5% more milk and went into detail about adding a feed additive. Soon the conversation went over Norm's head. Norm felt that Sadie had pushed him out of the conversation, and their relationship changed instantly. Within that moment, Norm thought that Sadie had gone from being the ideal daughter-in-law to the witch that had to go. Norm couldn't sleep that night, and the next morning he fired Sadie. Norm was only 58 years old and wasn't ready to give up control of the farm. At least that's what he thought was happening. "It's either me or her," he said to Matt, "and I'm not going anywhere for 5 years. She can go work somewhere else for 5 years, because I'm tired of her being bossy. Matt, if you don't like it, then you can both bugger off and get your own farm. But if you do that, I'll cut you out of my will." In that moment, Norm wasn't thinking or caring about what Matt thought about the decision. He didn't think through the impact such a decision would have to Matt's marriage or happiness. Norm didn't respect the fact that Matt and Sadie together did the work of 5 employees, and the farm couldn't afford the wages it would take to replace their incredible work ethic and skills. Norm was simply obsessed with his own emotional needs and focused on instant gratification, rather than the long-term fallout of how it would impact family dynamics or the farm. Few people understand that for some people, the farm or family business is the center of their identity. The business is who they are. If there is even an inkling that it is being taken from them, they will go on the defensive. It's the same as a man defending his own heart from a knife. They can rationalize some pretty irrational things. Norm had spent his entire life building the business, and he was used to having people follow his instructions. Without question, he felt helpless, thinking that his kingdom was under attack. To watch someone else take the lead with a salesman felt like a huge betrayal to Norm. He felt that Sadie had somehow taken what was his, and because of that, she couldn't be trusted anymore. For this reason, he fired her. Sadie was devastated, to say the least. Her life was farming, and without it, she didn't have a reason to live. I couldn't help but remember the same feelings I had sitting on that barn beam years before. Sadie didn't dream of milking someone else's cows as an employee. She dreamed of growing a successful business with her husband and raising her kids with her in-laws on the family farm. She left a long suicidal text on Matt's phone, who was plowing a field 10 miles down the road. Matt rushed home and had to kick in the bathroom door and wrap her wrists while calling the ambulance to save her life. A few hours later, I got the call from Matt.
The worst kind of stubbornness, narcissism.
When you're a successful farmer or business owner, you shape your world. It's your job to level mountains and create new ones by sheer determination. This is the worldview of a successful business person. The closer your reality aligns with your goals, the more successful you are. You're the boss. When you are a successful business owner, you have many employees who work for you. And when you say jump, they say, how high? Salesmen and service providers have the same attitude because they want your business. Within the community, people naturally look up to you because you have a respected farm or business. Your personal life and the schedule of what the family is doing is dictated by your schedule or the needs of the business. Your world becomes based on how you want it and when you want it. If it isn't how you want it, people get flack until they meet your expectations. For a lot of farmers and small family business owners, this business environment where everyone is subservient to your needs becomes toxic without anyone knowing it. You get surrounded by yes men, and they warp your sense of reality. By accident, you become narcissistic. Narcissism is the mental disorder of you. Sigmund Freud made an analogy of narcissism to childlike behavior, and I don't mean the innocent kind. Toddlers demand things and want them instantly, or they'll throw a temper tantrum, or they play the victim and dish a platter of flattery until they get their way. They feel like this is only right because they are the only ones who matter, and their needs are more important than everyone else's. The business environment of running a farm had caused Norm to develop a narcissistic disorder over time, and the day I showed up, he had most of these 10 classic narcissistic traits. Let me list them off for you now. 1. Me-first mentality. They always put themselves before the needs of the business or their partner. 2. Attention craving. They seek constant recognition, often overshadowing others' contributions. 3. Lack of empathy. They struggle to understand or care about the feelings and concerns of colleagues or their spouse. 4. Exaggerated achievements. They brag excessively about their successes, downplaying others' efforts. 5. Exploitative behavior. They might use coworkers or their partner for personal gain without guilt. 6. Entitlement attitude. They feel entitled to special treatment, regardless of others' needs or priorities. 7. Jealousy and envy. They feel threatened by others' accomplishments and may undermine them. 8. Manipulative tactics. They use cunning methods to achieve their goals, often at others' expense. 9. Blame shifting. They avoid taking responsibility for errors, blaming coworkers or their spouse instead. 10. Defensiveness. They react fiercely to criticism, often turning it around on others rather than reflecting on their behavior. Do you know of a family member who has these traits? How does it impact your life and your business? When I was a bachelor, I had a roommate who called me out one day on being a narcissist. He took me to a coffee shop one Sunday and meant it to be an intervention, but I really had no idea what he was talking about and didn't take it seriously, which frustrated him a lot. Looking back at who I was and how I dealt with people, he was probably right in his diagnosis. A decade later, when I got married to my wife, she was blown away when I told her this because she felt I was the exact opposite of that. She has given me one or two compliments over the years, but for me that is one of the best ones, because in working with this family, I learned a lot and tried to apply these lessons to my own life. We can all be a bit narcissistic by nature, especially in difficult times. Whereas narcissism was once thought to be genetic, or that a person had to check a certain number of boxes in order to have this disorder, many now believe its onset is heavily influenced by environment and circumstances. I believe it's on the spectrum, something like autism. When dealing with intense family business crises such as farm debt and farm succession, I've seen the stress of these circumstances bring out the worst quality in people, where they become hyper-focused on their immediate short-term emotional needs and lose perspective of the needs or concerns of others. A true narcissist will never admit to being a narcissist. But regardless of whether we check all the boxes to have this personality disorder, these traits don't exemplify the best in ourselves or the DNA of what makes successful partnerships. Whether you are in a marriage or a family business, these are the character traits that cause partnerships to be dysfunctional. Often I'd see a son or daughter calling the family patriarch a narcissist, but the truth was that the pot was calling the kettle black. Upon deeper reflection, I realized that I had called my dad narcissistic and stubborn, which he was, but at the same time, so was I. The truth was that it wasn't just Norm alone that displayed narcissistic traits. Sadie was starting to develop a few of them as well. She was often defensive, sometimes made brash statements that lacked empathy, and could be manipulative as well. She wasn't completely the victim, as she thought herself to be. The problem on that farm was that both Sadie and Norm were both narcissistic. They had let their pride and egos drive decisions which led to a lose-lose situation for everyone. This narcissism is what caused the downfall of my own parents' marriage and our seventh-generation family farm, pride and teamwork built it, but ultimately it was pride that caused my father to plow my crops under. I was hell-bent on not letting this happen to this great family. After getting the call from Matt, I didn't sleep. The truth was I didn't know what to say or do. Obviously, Sadie had already tried to take her life, but I could equally see both Matt and Norm doing something equally troubling. And I wouldn't judge them if they had dark thoughts. They were in a situation nobody would want to be in. When you are an alcoholic, all you need to do to start changing is pour the beer down the drain and stop drinking. However, becoming self-aware of when you are being jealous or manipulative is tougher to do. Most narcissists will never admit to having fault. Research has shown that nearly 60% of all marriages to narcissists, male or female, end in divorce. If you go to the online course platform Udemy, you'll see 14 courses on how to deal with a narcissist, and they all come to the same conclusion. The only solution is to leave that person. If you Google narcissism, you'll quickly see that most psychologists will ultimately recommend divorcing the person if they refuse to change. In this situation, there was no way in hell that Norm was going to admit to any fault. He was going to double down on his bad decisions, and it was going to lead to a very dire situation which would split that family. Neither was Sadie going to admit to any fault. She was the victim and would be abrasive if I ever brought up to her how she was sometimes harsh and unempathetic. Late that sleepless night, as I read over the list of signs of narcissism in front of me on my laptop, I couldn't help but think how messed up their situation was. Both Sadie and Norm were stubborn individuals, to an extreme. As I laid awake in bed that night, I thought how ironic it was that the traits of a narcissist are the exact opposite of the traits of what it took to be a good spouse or business partner. Then, in the middle of the night, it hit me.
Lean into it.
What if we identify what the traits of a narcissist are and do the exact opposite? Instead of trying to pretend that we are not narcissistic, why not lean into it? Why not recognize what narcissistic traits are and then say boldly that we all bear these traits from time to time? Because here's the reality. We are family business owners and are self-made men and women who live and work and find our deep passion within what we do. In other words, we are living the dream, right? At the very same time, it is also the place and environment that caters to the development of narcissism. When narcissism becomes rampant, then our dream turns into a living nightmare. If we recognize this and renounce it at the same time, we can build or rebuild a business and family culture that is free of these destructive traits. The time to stop pretending that we don't have them or that will never be me is now. Let's be honest with ourselves that we can and do bear these sins and get stubborn with ourselves. To have a mediation with Sadie bearing the hospital bandages wrapped around her wrists while sitting across the kitchen table from Norm was a very weird moment that I'll never forget. That cold house was so quiet that you could hear the grandfather's clock ticking in the next room. The last time I was on their farm was at Matt and Sadie's wedding. It was a great day, and everyone had so much fun. I would never have dreamed what was to happen 5 years later, or that I'd be sitting in their kitchen not as a guy sharing a pie with and talking about the good old times, but as a mediator who was about to talk about how this great family had fallen victim to one of the worst forms of stubbornness, narcissism. When you get married, you promise before God, family, and friends to put your spouse's needs before your own. You have your family standing behind you, pledging that they'll do everything to make your marriage successful as well. Narcissism is the antithesis to what it takes to have a successful marriage. In a strong marriage, both partners value mutual respect, understanding, and the ability to compromise. But someone with narcissistic tendencies tends to focus mostly on their own needs, struggles to empathize with their partner, and often places their own desires and feelings above all else. This can lead to a lot of one-sided decisions and a lack of emotional support. Instead of being a team, it becomes more about one person's show, and that can really strain the bond of marriage or a business partnership. I began the mediation as follows. The problem isn't an issue with a daughter-in-law being too bossy or a farmer feeling embarrassed that he doesn't know everything about dairy nutrition. I think the problem at hand here is that you folks aren't acting as a family or a business team, but as individuals where everyone is looking out for themselves. I stood up to grab a piece of paper from my bag across the room. I continued talking. From the conversations I had with each of you before this meeting, I can clearly see that everyone is acting out of their own self-interests, No one is focusing on what it means to have a successful farm and family, but rather everyone is acting out of fear.
Success and succession.
I looked at them and said slowly, "What if you guys focus on success rather than fear?" And in that moment, I wrote out the word succession letter by letter, just like this, Succession. Succession, I read out loud. The thing about succession is that it can be broken into two different words, success and the Latin suffix ion. And with that, I divided succession and ion with a line. Words that end in ion often show an action or process, and many of these can relate to change, like transformation or evolution. Or transition, piped in Matt. Yeah, exactly. These words all talk about some sort of change, just in different ways. The problem with your farm is that you all fear changes in the future of the farm. Fear of losing control, fear of not being validated, fear of distrust, fear of losing your identity, fear of not being always right, fear of losing your relationships, fear of having to choose between family, fear of walking on eggshells for years, fear of losing your marriage, fear of losing the farm, fear of a nightmare succession battle. I could have gone on, but I could see Sadie on the verge of tears. "But what can we do?" Matt muttered. "Everything feels hopeless right now." "You guys need to focus on change, but not in fear. Focus on what success looks like and what changes must be made for the farm to be successful and everyone to be happy in the future. It starts with you folks not acting out of self-interest, but everyone focusing on acting like family. This starts with killing narcissism within your family and business culture." Then I pulled out a simple laminated sign I had printed up at an office supply store the day before, which read, "Our family farm's culture statement. Together we thrive, divided we fall. In order to succeed, we have to shift from a me to we mindset. We will achieve this by adapting these 5 principles. 1. Be humble and empathetic. Always consider everyone's needs and feelings, not just your own. 2. Take responsibility. Always focus on problem-solving root issues without blame or playing defense. 3. Never feel entitled to more than you've earned. Work hard to earn everyone's respect daily. 4. Treat everyone with kindness, respect boundaries, and never take advantage of anyone. 5. Never need praise or be envious. Be grateful and daily appreciate others' contributions." I said narcissistic traits are the opposite of what makes a good team. These 5 rules tie in several principles that flip narcissistic qualities on their head and replace them with 5 principles that will bring positive behavioral changes. I asked, "What would happen if you adapted these 5 principles for your family business?" They all looked at me stunned for a moment. But as they looked over the rules, you could see the light bulbs turning on and everyone's body language opening up. I said, "Before we start talking about succession, we must focus on success, not fears. I always thought of this farm as heaven on earth. How can we make it that way for everyone? We need to get you guys better at talking about the buy-in or the changes to this business that you need to make to create a farm to be proud of without pride and egos getting in the way. That starts not with you guys being stubborn with each other, but being stubborn on yourselves to daily be the partner anyone would want to work with. That starts with this not being his farm or her farm, but our heaven on earth that we are building together. This isn't accomplished by you putting your needs first, but everyone putting family first. You must kill the narcissism on this farm and start working together as the team I know you can be." With that, I gave Norm the sign, closed the mediation, and jumped in my truck. I left the farm and got about 10 miles before they called me back, and we had a really constructive meeting. That sign still hangs in their milk house today, and they are still farming together.